Bueno, pues bienvenidos a todos al primer torneo de la séptima Liga de Debate Preuniversitario CICAE, Universidad Camilo José Cela. Pues voy a empezar por presentar a los equipos. Los equipos que se enfrentan en este debate son One Reverse y Adastra Perasta. Voy a seguir por recordar la pregunta, que ¿es positivo el rápido avance que ha sufrido en los últimos años la posibilidad de modificación genética? El público puede tuitear con el hashtag Liga CICAE UCJC y os invitamos a seguir en las redes sociales el torneo de la Liga de Debate CICAE, donde podéis encontrar fotos y anuncios de los debates. Recordamos que supondrá un aviso el desajuste positivo o negativo entre 8 y 15 segundos respecto del tiempo establecido en cada intervención. Durante el debate haré indicaciones de tiempo. Cuando quede un minuto levantaré el dedo, cuando queden 30 segundos el puño cerrado y posteriormente indicaré la cuenta atrás desde 10 segundos. Mucha suerte a todos y que comience el debate.
In the time I will be talking about why genetic modification is urgent and beneficial, 75 people will die, either from climate change or hunger. And a rapid progress in genetic modification can solve this. Good afternoon, judges, opposition, public here present. My name is Lucia Rejón, and I'm the first speaker for the team in favor, who defends that a rapid progress is better for ourselves and for our world. We will base our position on two different arguments. In our first one, we will establish the necessity to distinguish between application and investigation. The rapid acquisition of knowledge itself is not harmful and doesn't involve a fast application, because we must not forget that genetic modification is a technology, and technology per se cannot do anything. It cannot benefit nor harm, but rather it's the occasional misguided use of said technology, the one that causes the pain, the one that causes that damage. And between investigation and application lies a concept of legislation. To regulate the implementation of said technology, it must go through a series of requirements that, if met, are able to guarantee the safety of our product. There are several security regulating agencies, and many will be created in the future. Nowadays, we can rely on institutions and laws such as the European legislation, the FPA, the AAP, or the Cartagena Protocol. And with this legislation and a rapid progress, we can tackle problems such as world hunger and climate change even faster. This leads us to our second argument, the obvious benefits that genetically modified organisms have. The development of GMOs provides many advantages in many fields, advantages that are necessary and urgent. On one hand, we must talk about the positive consequences that they have in our economy. It has been proven that by introducing GMO seeds, the cost associated with their care is significantly reduced, because these plants require less care. Many of the modifications enable plants to resist illnesses or to grow in severe conditions. So people in countries with lower fertility soil can grow their own crops. They can even modify plants to produce their own pesticides by having the ability to target a specific plague, reducing the cost of the manufacture. And also, those GMO seeds are modified to be more nutritious, so malnutrition could be reduced. Moreover, these plants have a higher rate of productivity. Using less surface, these crops produce the same amount or even more food than expected, with less ground investment. By reducing the prices, more people will be able to buy them. The world hunger rates could be reduced, because world hunger isn't an issue that can be ignored. It must be faced as soon as possible, because having the possibility of quickly improving their quality of life, we must do it. But not only it helps mankind, it also contributes to stopping climate change. Both the reduction of pesticides and the reduction of surface used contributes to reducing deforestation and reducing the implementation of toxic substances in our environment. Along with this, there are also even more modifications that help our environment, like saving species or reducing toxic gases. The rapid progress will allow us to make those necessary changes. In addition to these advantages, we must include the benefits in medicine. The possibilities here are endless, and amongst many other, we could highlight the cure of illnesses like Huntington, or the implementation of a personalized medicine. Because we need to evolve. We need to stop climate change. We need to stop world hunger, and a rapid progress, and only the rapid progress, will be the solution. Thank you very much, judges and public.
This phrase actually being taken into heart. The sink of the Titanic, the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, all these were fruits of negligence, of rushing into things, and not taking the time to assess the consequences and effects. Genetic modification has recognized benefits, and so in order to not have these technologies become another disaster, we have to take precaution, slow down, and reap the full benefits of GM safely. Good afternoon, I'm Alice Harvey, and on behalf of my team, Uno Reverse, I'll be presenting the arguments that defend why we're completely against the rapid rise. But before I present our arguments, we must first define some relevant terms. By rapid progress, we understand organizations investing increasingly more times and funds in order to see a rapid evolution in the short term. By genetic modification, we understand the process of altering the genetic makeup of living organisms. We'd like to highlight the word modification, as we don't think cloning is relevant to the debate. So, to substantiate our thesis, we bring two arguments. 1, lack of experimentation, and 2, lack of regulation. First of all, with lack of experimentation. The rapid advance of genetic modification implies a less rigorous experimentation. This occurs because companies are profit-driven and therefore strive to achieve quickness of production. This in no way means that companies are evil, but simply they want to achieve greater profits, which happens when products are carried out fast. However, this leads to safety concerns. The quicker it is done, the more that essential steps are skipped in the process. Here we have our first example. During the 50s and the 60s, there was a huge increase in the number of children born with very serious malformations who lacked their extremities as a consequence of their mothers having taken the medication thalidomide, which was marketed against nausea and dizziness. This happened because of poor experimentation and regulation delivered by companies and the government. It hasn't been shown that genetic modification should be implemented in 10 years, for example. So why risk it? Why risk the event of the thalidomide generation happening again? Having the right experimentation in a 50 years' time is much more efficient and will put less lives at risk. Okay, let's move on to our second argument, lack of regulation. So the field of genetic modification is a largely uncharted territory. We are unfamiliar with its consequences. We don't know what is good and what is bad yet. And so therefore, how can we efficiently, and the key word is efficiently, control something that we don't understand? We argue that in order to have efficient legislation, the rapid rise of genetic modification needs to slow down in order to permit better evaluation and understanding of GM's aftermath. As currently, third parties are evolving genetic modification in many places without being limited by the law. Interest-driven parties aren't currently being appropriately controlled by legislation. An example is given of Chinese scientist He Jiankui, who has led an unprecedented experiment in editing the genome of 2 embryos using CRISPR technology. The Lancet, the medical journal, says that CRISPR research as a research tool is relatively new, and so the experiments of this scientist was truly unruly, as we don't yet know the full consequences of that. The scientists write for this journal that there is no legal framework in China regarding genetic modification, and they state that gene editing technology has developed rapidly in recent years. The laws regulating science and technology have not yet been updated to reflect these developments and might not be sufficiently comprehensive. Back to the case of the scientist He Jiankui. He was imprisoned for a while, but because of the lack of regulation, he was ultimately able to proceed with his work and Janqui is reportedly doing the CRISPR trials again, another genetically modified embryo on the way. So, to reap the full benefits of genetic modification, let's take our time to properly understand this craft, to properly experiment and implement legislation. Our team is therefore completely against the rapid rise of genetic modification because we recognize its benefits and want to do things well. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Irene Delgado, and I'm the first refuter of the team in favor of the question today posed. My team defends that the rapid progress in genetic modification is indeed a positive development. I'll start my intervention by refuting some of the opposition's arguments stated in their introduction. You've talked about the lack of experimentation, that companies want to achieve benefit and safety measures are skipped in the process. You've talked about some examples, but this might not happen, and this will not happen with legislation in genetic modification. Legislation has evolved, and we already know the risks that genetic modification has if implemented incorrectly. And this directly crashes with our first argument, which is based on legislation, which I'll explain later. You've also talked about the effects and that we don't know what can cause a good effect or a bad one. And you've talked about the Chinese scientist who edited 2 twin embryos. But this, remember, that was made out of legislation. Law will always be broken. But this man is now in prison, which proves that legislation works. In our first argument, as already stated in our introduction, it's important to distinguish between the investigation and application. The scientific development of technology is always useful, as it allows us to keep on improving our society's living conditions. Knowledge itself cannot be harmful. Think of genetic engineering in terms of a vehicle. A car itself cannot do any harm, but it's the driver's wrong use of the vehicle that can cause accidents. Moreover, a rapid progress in the possibility of genetic modification doesn't necessarily mean an equally fast application. Genetic modification must only be applied when it's passed a series of tests and it's proven to be safe. Not because a new technique has been recently developed has to be available to the public immediately. This is when legislation becomes necessary. Due to the high complexity of the matter, we understand that the legislation of genetic modification must be undertaken by organizations out of the national scope. Legislation is regulated in a cowardly manner, especially in the fields that concern public health. To protect society, the law initially forbids in order to avoid possible harm, and as research is done to ensure that a certain procedure is safe, it begins to allow it, but always under a strict legislative regime. This law will not be created from scratch, as there are already existing institutions and laws that take care of these aspects. However, due to this rapid progress, legislation must be increased and specified. Some examples of this are the European Union legislation about genetically modified organisms, which has evolved considerably in recent years, increasingly restricting and controlling the application of such technology due to the growing research. There are other existing organisms, such as the Environmental Protective Agency, which constantly reports on application of genetically modified crops to ensure their safe evolution. This last organization has already fixed issues in the use of GMO crops. A type of genetically modified corn was approved by this agency, but only for animal consumption. Farmers mixed it up and mixed this type of corn with corn that was meant for human consumption. Because of the supervision of this agency, they were able to detect this and take the products out of the stores. This was a human error. This error wasn't even caused by genetic modification, and this agency still managed to solve it. Legislation is both possible and effective, and this proves it. Our second argument is based on the benefits that genetic modification and its way of development allows us to tackle severe issues that need to be solved as soon as possible. This includes problems such as climate change and world hunger. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change sets 2030 as the last call to save the Earth. Let's set Bt maize as an example. This type of corn has been genetically modified to express the Bt protein, which allows this type of corn to be resistant to cornborne, the pest that causes the loss of 35% of the corn production in Spain each year. Since this GMO was installed in Spain 20 years ago, it has achieved an additional production of 1.89 million tons. In addition, it has reduced the use of insecticides by 678,000 kilograms, reduced the use of irrigation water by 1,042 million cubic meters, and avoided the release on 1.58 million kilograms of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Ladies and gentlemen, genetically modified organisms help economy and our environment. How isn't this beneficial? And I'm only providing information about the Bt base in Spain. Imagine the extent of the benefits that could be achieved if this technology would be implemented globally. On the other hand, crops are also genetically modified crops can be also good for humans. They can be modified to be more nutritious, allowing us to tackle the problem of world hunger. Moreover, great strides are being made in the medical field to cure genetically transmitted diseases such as Huntington. We have to tackle these problems, and we have to do it now. And this would only be possible with the rapid progress of genetic modification. In conclusion, a rapid development of genetic modification, when well regulated, allows us to safely tackle global issues that need to be solved now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jose Contreras, and I will start these 6 minutes by refuting and further construct our own arguments. Firstly, I would like to refute the first argument they brought us, that is the necessity to distinguish investigation and application. And we agree that we need to distinguish between investigation and application, but a rapid development in this technology, in this investigation, in this research, would only create flaws on the research. Would only create flaws in the research that could create major consequences in the world. Let's put an example, Mars. Elon Musk, the director of SpaceX, said that going to Mars will reduce our chance of extinction to 0%. But why are we not in Mars yet? Because we need to be pretty sure that going to Mars is safe. Now, I'm also going to refute the second argument, that is solve world hunger. Basically, what they're saying is that GMOs would solve world hunger, but I would like to take into consideration that GMOs have been in the market since 1990s, and there haven't been a major impact on world hunger because of GMOs, but because of the United Nations trying to help African countries solve the world hunger. For example, the 880 million people that are suffering for world hunger aren't even eating GMOs, and they are in the market. I'm going to refute the third argument, that is solve climate change. So basically, I want to remind everyone why climate change is happening right now. Because of technology, because of a rapid advance in technology. Basically, for example, cars. Cars create CO2, and cars were invented over 50 years ago, or more, maybe 100 years ago. But what happened? People started realizing that cars create CO2, and then implemented laws. Laws didn't happen first. That's why we need to be pretty sure that this technology doesn't have a consequence on human well-being. Also, about the fourth argument, that is medicine, I would like to refute this argument saying that most illnesses are not even genetic illnesses. Most illnesses are from viruses or bacteria, and they have been cured with vaccines that do not use genetic modification, with medicines. And for example, cancer. Cancer is only 5% hereditary. Even cancer wouldn't be solved with GMs. So that's why it's not that important as they are saying. There are more solutions to these problems. Now, I would like to also take into consideration that, as they said, there was a human error with the corn, that they mixed the corn, and the FDA managed to solve it. But who runs the FDA? Humans. So human error can also happen in this agency. That's why we need to slow down the process to be sure that we regulate the laws. And that's why, as I said, yeah, we need to regulate the laws. But as I put in an example, cars were invented before the laws. So that's why we need to first investigate, to research, pretty sure, and we need to be pretty sure that there will not be more consequences. Now, I would like to construct our own arguments. The first argument is lack of experimentation. The consequences due to lack of experimentation in rapid development lead to bad outcomes both in agriculture and in medicine. Cases like the one explained in the introduction, in which the pill thalidomide affected pregnant women's babies, will occur. However, on a greater scale, medicine has an immense impact on human beings and society as of right now. Therefore, it is absolutely crucial to make sure that the process is slowed down and concise in order for this to not escalate, having worse effects on human beings that are already vulnerable. This is uncharted territory and has to be treated with great care. In agriculture, although many foods are already being genetically modified right now, scientists must ensure that the processes carried out are reliable, as this will affect any human being ingesting food. One of the main benefits of GM is its ability to create a high crop yields, which could potentially help solve hunger. Thus, if the process by which the GMs is made not effectively, it could have an extremely detrimental effect on citizens of both developing countries and developed countries. For instance, the ISAAA agency, a non-profit organization sharing bioscience with farmers in developing nations, will distribute GM seeds to 47 countries to cultivate. We can allow distribution like this that are not certain of the effects on society. Now, I would like to construct on our second argument, that is lack of regulation. In our introduction, we gave an example that is, if you're just thinking of just China, and I would like to state real quick that the scientist is not in prison right now. Take another example. One of the Western countries in the world, the US, germline gene editing in the US by acts of the Congress is banned, but there is no federal law that prohibits private funding investigation to happen. So basically, you could just build a lab, and that's it. You could investigate on your own. You could do research on your own. So human gene therapy research must be banned, but it is not. That's why we need to take time to search. Therefore, the lack of regulation will lead to negative consequences. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Miriam Greenwood, and I'm the second refute of the team firmly in favour of the rapid development of genetically modified organisms. I would like to begin my intervention by refuting the opposition's arguments and counter-arguments. To begin, the opposition has stated that there is a lack of experimentation. To this, we demonstrate experiments that have been realised with GMOs and research. For example, there has been experiments on GMO food that there are no health benefits to eating GMO foods over non-GMO foods. There is also experimentation on the search and replace of the genome editing without double-strand breaks or donor DNA, and there is also experimentation of analysis of risks and benefits in Spanish scientists, where GMO modified organisms are helpful in medicine. In their second argument, the opposition has stated that there is a lack of regulation. To this, we enter into evidence the huge amounts of regulation that there are on GMOs. For example, the US Food and Drug Administration, the US Environmental Protection Agency, and the US Department of Agriculture, which all ensure that GMOs are safe for human consumption. GMOs are also regulated by organizations such as the USDA and the Health Inspection Service in the US. There is also regulation in GMO plant developers, which meet with the FDA about potential new products for use in human and animal food, and GMO developers that submit food safety to the FDA. We can also show evidence in the European legislation, such as in the Directive 2009 of 41 and in the Directive 2001 of 18 CA. We can also show legislation that proves that GMOs are safe to eat and they meet all safety standards, since they are held to the same safety standards than non-GMO foods. The opposition has stated also the possible consequences that might happen. To this, we answer with all the benefits that GMOs can provide. These include benefits to help to stop the extinction of endangered species, benefits such as the reduction of pests, pesticides, increasing yields and increasing profits, benefits such as economic, ecological, food safety and social benefits of the deployment of Bt transgenic plants, benefits such as the conservation of species, and prime editing substantially expands the scope of capabilities of genome editing and could correct up to 89% of known genetic variants with human diseases. There's also many other benefits located into GM food, for example, genetically modified salmon, which provides more nutrients. The opposition has also stated, the opposition has also stated the example of the Chinese scientist, which was jailed and later released. However, we would like to make the opposition aware that this case falls under a human rights legislation and under the penal code, and doesn't fall under a legislation which is on genetically modified organisms. So, as such, falls outside of the question of this debate. The opposition has also stated that there would be flaws in the research. To this, we answer that flaws in research are good. Flaws and mistakes allow us to learn. What is important is the legislation that is put in place after these laws is enough to stop them from happening. The opposition has also stated that climate change is happening because of this technology, and yes, we agree on this. And for this reason, let's redeem ourselves. Let's redeem ourselves with genetically modified organisms so we can stop climate change with inventions such as of genetically modified plants, which help to purify the air. The opposition has also stated that there are some illnesses, such as cancer, which are not solved by GMOs, and to this we would like to put as examples diseases which are helped by GMOs, such as Huntington disease, that is present in one single gene, diseases like sickle cell disease or homocharacteristic diseases. The opposition has also stated that there have been problems with the FDA, and to this we would like to mention the large amount of organizations which also regulate genetically modified organisms, which aren't only the FDA. Yes, your question?
So you say that the end justifies the means. So basically, that you learn from your mistakes. So killing a baby is good to know that that the GMO is not good.
We are not talking about killing babies. You were talking about flaws that might be made inside of the experimentation, and we are not talking about human experimentation, as GMOs don't only bark at terms about human genetic modification, also a genetic modification in food. To continue, I would like to develop my team's arguments, which start with the emphasizing the difference between investigation and application and the legislation that lies between these two terms. I would like to make clear that the rapid acquisition of knowledge in itself is not harmful. It is the use that we as a society make of it, and these fast developments allow us to solve current problems such as climate change or certain illnesses, and this is the reason behind why a rapid investigation is so important. We highlight the importance of legislation, which is not only possible, but is already being done by organisms of national scope, as I have mentioned in my refutals. For example, the EU has been making legislation about GMOs that has evolved considerably in recent years, restricting and controlling the application of this technology. Our second argument demonstrates the obvious benefits that genetically modified organisms provide. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Ines Aschenbrenner, and I will start my turn by refuting, and afterwards I will explain why our arguments are still standing after the interventions of the team in favor. Okay, so they presented us two arguments. The first argument about the necessity to distinguish investigation and application, and then another argument explaining benefits on solving world hunger, solving climate change, and medicine. Okay, so let's start with the first argument. So, to this, they basically explained the various amounts of agencies that there are to regulate, for example, FDA. But we have an example with the one of thalidomide, which we have presented throughout the debate, that the FDA was not able to approve of this drug. Therefore, 800,000 babies died because of this, because they didn't know of the existence of this drug. So that means that these organizations at the end also have flaws because of that human error that the first rebuttaler said very well. So therefore, these agencies at the end of the day are also flawed, and they can't cover everything that GM modification would reach if the advance would be fast. So passing on to their second argument, and with the three branches. So first of all, solving world hunger. So genetic modification started around the 1990s, and hunger is still the same. It has not changed in developing countries, and although right now we can see corn that is genetically modified in the market, it has not impacted hunger. And in addition, here in this part of hunger, well, we can see how it would create the widening a gap between developed and developing countries, and creating a dependency between these two countries, because these seeds that are genetically modified cannot be reproduced. So if you plant it and it grows, you take it, it won't reproduce again. So that means that the developing countries would have to rely on developed countries to give them these seeds again. So at the end, you would just create a monopoly of developed countries. Passing on to their argument that it would solve climate change. So we agree with this. There are multiple things that they say that we agree. The benefits of genetic modification, we agree with all of those. But we don't think that we have to take fast measures, skipping steps, less rigorous experimentation to carry these out. All the aspects that we're evaluating are very important, and we need to take them slow. We need to take them step by step in order for nothing to be left out. And with medicine, we have the evidence, for example, of malaria, which affects many developing countries, especially in Africa, which has been killing a lot of people. And World Health Organization explained how a slow process is needed in order for no mutations to occur. And this is essential because we don't want to quickly try to make a medicine to help cure a disease, and then afterwards see all the consequences, mutations, how other species have been extinguished because of it. So now passing to our arguments. So we present two arguments: lack of experimentation and lack of regulation. So to the first argument, they basically said that this will not happen because of legislation. Here we have a graph in which we can see this is an evidence by the USDA, which they also have mentioned, the Department for Agriculture. And here we can see how in the past of the years, how the amount of regulations that have not been controlled, that have just passed through, increases. In 2015, for example, we can see how it has increased a lot more than here. So at the end of the day, these regulations would not be able to cover everything that's occurring, and would not be able to see how to stop the negative impact of genetically modified organisms. Okay, so additionally, they tried to attack the evidence that we presented about the Chinese scientist, which was put in jail because of his practice on genetically modifying humans. So the fact is that they said, okay, yeah, this man is already in jail. Yes, he's been in jail for 3 years. Only 3 years. He's out, and he's proclaimed that he will do it again. We need regulations that will be strong, and right now we don't have that. Right now the agencies are not covering everything that needs to be covered, and regulations within countries are also not covering, as we can see with this example. Now passing on to our second argument, the lack of regulation. So they basically said that there's specific and concise regulation, but I think throughout my intervention I've explained how this regulation is flawed and how it would not help. But in addition, we can see in this report by three professors from the University of Institute of Medical Law in Peking that the laws regulating science and technology are not updated to reflect the developments that quickly. So they need that slow process in order to adjust. In addition, they've said that genetic modification doesn't have to be introduced immediately. It is already being implemented right now in the food. But in addition, fast means that steps will be skipped. We don't want that to happen. We want the experimentation to be rigorous and adequate in order for us not to fail on anything that could happen with genetic modification. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, honourable judges, team in favour, team in against, audience. Thank you for this debate where definitely many interesting arguments were brought, but ultimately it has to be said that the team in against arguments prevail. Why? Well, let me explain. First of all, we'll start off with their arguments and how exactly we rebutted those. So, to their argument on application versus legislation, we basically said that regulation truly isn't being as efficient as they claim to be, and we proved this with numerous examples. For example, the US, which has constitutional laws but not federal laws upon private companies. And we also highlighted that these very agencies that they claim to be controlling these technologies are actually flawed, as we saw with the thalidomide example, the FDA approving something that was obviously not good for human consumption. Well, let's move on to their argument on that several global issues can be solved with this technology. And we'd like to say to all these positives that we acknowledge these benefits, and we think that yes, they will do great good to the world, and this is why we want to do things safely and take our time to make sure this will be good for the people. So, for their impact on the hunger crisis, we said, well, hey, GMOs have been in the market since the 1990s, and we've not seen a significant change regarding the hunger crisis. And it was truly the UN who has made the largest advances. And so we mitigated their impact by saying, well, maybe their impacts are exaggerated. And we also highlighted a very important point, which was that a dependency is created between developing and developed countries. We talked about these seeds, that GMO seeds can't reproduce themselves, and therefore these developing countries are constantly going to be dependent on developed countries in order to have their food. What's going to happen? Profit-driven businesses are going to be the ones benefited. Regarding the field of medicine, we also mitigated their impact in this area by saying that there were many more solutions that exist, and the large amount of medical advances that we've seen in recent years were not due to genetic modification, and regarding the case of cancer, only 5% are hereditary, therefore the impact really wouldn't be that massive. So, regarding our own arguments, to lack of experimentation, they mentioned again that legislation is currently being in place, and we know that it's correct, we know the consequences, but again, we brought several examples of in the US, of the FDA getting it wrong. And so ultimately, it can't be trusted that we completely understand this craft. Next, to our argument of lack of regulation, they basically said that we can implement more laws, but again, we're seeing many flaws in the system, and it's not going correctly. So in order to reap the full benefits of genetic modification, let's take our time to properly understand this craft. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Roberto Benavides, and in my speech I will be highlighting why our position has been outstanding throughout the debate by showing that the rapid progress made in recent years in the possibility of genetic modification is simply something that will indeed have a positive impact in ourselves and in our world. I will be doing this by mentioning the arguments of the opposing team, demonstrating how we rebounded them, and finally showing that our line of argument is strong standing. First of all, the first argument was the lack of experimentation. And they mentioned that companies want to achieve benefits and safety measures are skipped. but legislation has evolved and we have proved that it's effective with more than enough evidence. But still, it has been researched more than enough and has only been proven safer and safer. And we must add that they have based all his legislation argument on one agency and one mistake. We must not take the part for the whole. Their second argument, lack of regulation. There are possible consequences, but those may or not may happen because they are based on an assumption. But thanks to the great legislation examples we have provided, we can confirm that they will be looked at and solved by the rapid investigation. There has been proven as well by our team that their second argument, even that their concern already exist, many institutions and legislations to regulate. I would also like to add that they haven't said anything about our environmental argumency because it is indeed a fact. And also, they have talked about the release of a scientist in China, but they haven't taken into consideration that what my teammate stated about that being regulated by the Chinese Penal Code, not the regulation regarding GMOs. And also, they have stated that there has been no reduction on the hunger rates, but they haven't taken into consideration the question asked, the possibility that hasn't been applied, but we have proven its value, evidences supporting it. Also, let me just read our case real quick. We have established the difference between the act of investigating and applying, and here I ask you all, do you believe that knowledge itself can be harmful? We must really understand the difference between applying measures of which we are not sure of the long-term consequences and investigating and obtaining knowledge that can be used to solve many of the problems society struggles with, which is indeed what we are defending. Also, we cannot deny the obvious benefits that GMOs have. They bring larger improvements than the non-genetically modified organisms that make a difference in areas such as economics, productivity, or even nutritional value, make themselves really useful. When we have by our side the possibility of improving our quality of life, we must do it. We must take advantage of all the possible benefits that GMOs have. To conclude, we can ensure that a rapid progress in genetic modification is indeed positive. Thank you all.